I feel like many Americans who grew up, going to school and saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag every day, one nation under God, indivisible, might initially hear the idea of secession and just sort of think, wasn't that resolved in the 1860s with Abraham Lincoln and the South not being allowed to be removed from the Union? But I mean, obviously you're here advocating it. So what's sort of the background, maybe from a legal
that's
standpoint?
actually, you're hitting on one of the biggest obstacles we face, because to put it bluntly, Abraham Lincoln really did a number on us 150 years ago. I mean, he's perceived by most Americans to have been our greatest president because he freed the slaves. The reality is that Abraham Lincoln was a tyrant, that the Civil War was primarily about protection, preserving the Union. Freeing the slaves was kind of an afterthought. I mean, there are very strong quotes to suggest that Abraham Lincoln was a racist and was essentially indifferent about the slaves, except as an exercise of political expediency. But Lincoln convinced most Americans that secession is illegal, immoral, and certainly unconstitutional. And our position is nothing could be further from the truth. In terms of constitutionality, there's several arguments. At the top of the list would be the 10th Amendment, which essentially says if the Constitution doesn't forbid something, then it's implicitly left to the states. That's their option, and the Constitution does not forbid secession. A second argument is that when the original 13 colonies created the United States of America in 1776, 3 of those new states, Rhode Island, Virginia, and New York, all had escape clauses built into their constitutions. And so if those 3 states can escape, what about the other 47? And then a third constitutional argument is even before the Civil War in 1861, about a dozen states, many of them were northern states, including Vermont, had nullified the Constitution. They had essentially said there's some statute of the U.S. government that is in violation of our state constitution. We're not going to play. And Vermont was such a state, it nullified the Fugitive Slave Act back in 1858. So our position is that secession is indeed constitutional. It is legal, but that ultimately it's whether or not Vermont is allowed to secede or not is a question of not constitutionality, but of political will. The political will of the people of Vermont versus the political will of the United States government, assuming that they attempted to block it.
One of the things we were talking about earlier is the seizing of the assets of the people in the Midwest who are trying to start their own currency. They were seeing a lot of success, and the federal government came in. When did you say this was? Just recently, right?
It was, I believe it was last year. There was a mint that was
right.
that was minting its own silver and gold currency, and the federal government came in and basically they were issuing paper notes for it, like a bank would have done in before the sort of centralized banking system was created, and essentially the federal government came in and seized as evidence all of their collateral. So all of their gold and silver reserves in their vaults, suddenly all this paper that they had issued, people couldn't redeem it anymore because the federal government is still sitting in as evidence.
Yes.
So I mean, there are many ways that the federal government can and has acted to sort of impede people's attempts to be perhaps slightly more autonomous from its control. But you brought up earlier another issue that I think would be very, very interesting. You brought
Where
up
in
the
the
idea of
Midwest did
nullification.
that take place?
Where
in the Midwest?
I don't remember. I think it was Indiana, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think it was.
But you brought up the idea of nullification, that many states, especially before the Civil War, had engaged in nullification when they saw the federal government as doing things that were against their constitutions, that were against the interests of their people. And if the federal government is continuing along this path of bailout after bailout, continuing to appropriate more and more of the national wealth and debase the currency, do you think that there's the potential for state legislatures to start an attempt at nullifying things again? Or what's your opinion on that?
I think it's a possibility. I think that the combination of the meltdown and the bailout and the financial implications we've been talking about this hour have the potential of raising the level of pain of individual citizens. And when that pain level gets high enough, they're willing to consider other alternatives. Nullification is one such option. Secession is a more extreme. I think that secession is basically, a radical act of rebellion driven by anger and fear. And there's no doubt that there are many Vermonters who are angry at the federal government, at George Bush in particular. But the fear factor so far hasn't been high enough. Most Vermonters are still feeling, fat and happy and sassy and kind of content with life as it is, and are prepared to do very little other than, elect Barack Obama president by way of change.
Yeah.
Which, from my standpoint, is tantamount to nothing.
Do you happen to know offhand what percentage of, well, I guess they weren't Americans at that point, but colonialists supported secession from England back in the 1700s?
Yeah, it's apparently historians say that it's between 25 and 30%. There was by no means a majority of them supported it. So it's kind of gratifying. Recently, there was a Zogby poll of the United States that shows that about 20% of Americans support the idea of their state seceding. In Vermont, it's actually a little bit lower. It's only about 12 or 13%. But maybe we're halfway there then. That's of registered voters who support secession.
Yeah. The communication, well, I suppose there wasn't nearly as sophisticated a communication system back in the 1700s as there is now.
They didn't have the internet?
Right. But there was, at the same time, a substantially smaller population. And it seems that, given the oppression they faced from England, may have been a bit more overt than what we experience now. Some of these issues are not understood by many people, so they don't have the sentiment yet of wanting to secede, really do something to that level about the current situation. What do you think were the main sentiments of that 70% back in the 1700s of people who wanted to stay part of England and wanted to remain part of the British Empire, as opposed to those who firmly advocated secession?
I mean, one can, imagine, loyalty to the crown, loyalty to the homeland, inertia, fear of the unknown, of going out on their own, and there's some of the same kind of resistance that we encounter. I mean, secession today, as a result of the Civil War, is kind of a taboo. It's one of the few topics in which left and right agree on that it's anathema. They have different reasons as to why they're opposed to it, but the beauty of being a secessionist is you get attacked from both the left and the right.
And so, how would we go about absolving Vermont's share of the national debt if we were to secede?
Oh, that's one of my favorite questions. See, I'm of the opinion that the United States of America probably has positive net worth, and I don't think that one has to argue very vigorously. If you add up all of the assets, resources of this country, I would argue the assets exceed the liabilities. And if you concede positive net worth, then the question you've raised is there's no problem. We simply file for a rebate for our share of the positive net worth. In other words, from a bargaining standpoint, we would never acknowledge the problem that you have raised.
But I'm sure it would be brought up.
No doubt.
Yeah.
So we might concede to not take the rebate from the federal lands and call it even.
Right. A wash.
Mm-hmm.